They mocked a circle of grandmothers as nothing more than gossip and yarn. The widowed teacher just smiled and kept knitting. By the time the developers came with their bulldozers, every legal document had already been rewritten, each signature tied to the very women they'd laughed at. They thought they were dealing with hobbyists. They were dealing with heirs, wives, and mothers who knew exactly how to stitch a trap in plain sight. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The rain came softly that morning, a silvery drizzle tapping against the tall windows of the old community hall. Inside, the air hummed with the steady rhythm of knitting needles, click, pause, pull. A circle of women sat around a long oak table, the scent of brewed coffee mingling with lavender hand cream and wet wool. Esther Graham sat at the head of the table, her posture straight despite the years. Her needles moved in perfect symmetry, mathematical precision honed from a lifetime of teaching equations and correcting careless errors. Beside her, Rosa Fields hummed low under her breath, occasionally squinting over the rim of her glasses to adjust a loop. Nina Tran worked quietly in the corner, her yarn the color of storm clouds, her eyes darting toward the windows whenever thunder rolled in the distance. It was an ordinary morning, or so it pretended to be. The front door creaked open, and the cozy hum of the room faltered. Marcy Blackwell's voice cut through the air like a sharp pin. "Well, well," she said, stepping inside in high-heeled boots that clacked against the wood floor. "What's on today's Stitch and Snitch session?" Laughter, thin and sharp, echoed from the doorway. Dina Wallace, her perfect blowout untouched by the rain, leaned against the frame of the door with her arms crossed. "Don't worry," she said with a smirk, eyes sweeping over the circle. "They'll be out once we break ground." The words hung there, wet and heavy as the mist outside. Esther's needles froze mid-row. The faint metallic click of the last stitch echoed in the silence. Across the table, Rosa's expression hardened. Nina's yarn slipped from her fingers, rolling softly across the floor. Rosa leaned closer to Esther, her voice low but fierce. "You hear that?" Esther didn't look up. Her hands rested in her lap, the unfinished square of deep green yarn hanging between them like a quiet question. "I felt it," she said finally, her tone calm but edged with something colder, something mathematical in its precision. Marcy smirked, flipping her hair over one shoulder. "Don't take it personally, ladies. Progress waits for no one." Rosa straightened, chin up. "Progress," she repeated, tasting the word like it was something spoiled. Dina stepped further in, heels clicking, voice dipped in condescension. "You've all had a good run here, but we're talking about something modern, something people actually want to look at. Not—" She gestured vaguely around the hall. "Whatever this is." The hall around them was far from perfect. Paint peeling in corners, floorboards creaking, but its warmth was undeniable. Every picture frame, every faded flyer on the corkboard, every mismatched chair told the story of 50 years of neighborhood birthdays, bake sales, and shelter from the storm evenings. Esther's eyes drifted toward the far wall, where an old photograph hung slightly crooked. The original co-op founders, young and idealistic, standing in front of the freshly built community hall. Her late husband was in that photo, smiling, hammer in hand. She turned back to Dina, her expression unreadable. "And what exactly do you plan to put here?" Dina's smile widened. Luxury duplexes, classy, efficient, and profitable. The HOA already voted. Once we finalize the demolition permits, this place comes down. Rosa made a small, sharp sound, part laugh, part snort. "Over my dead body." Marcy rolled her eyes. "That could be arranged." The line drew a few uneasy chuckles from the doorway. Nina reached down for her fallen yarn, her hands trembling. You can't just take it, she said softly. This hall belongs to everyone. Belonged, Dina corrected. Past tense. The rain outside thickened, tapping harder on the windows. A draft whispered through the hall, rustling old flyers pinned to the wall. Esther inhaled slowly, knitting still idle in her lap. You think this place is weak because it's quiet, she said. Her voice was steady, the calm of a storm before it breaks. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. Dina's smirk faltered. Excuse me? Esther met her eyes. You should go, she said simply. Something in the air shifted, an invisible tension, like a string pulled taut between two strong hands. Marcy scoffed, but Dina hesitated before turning. Enjoy your little tea party while it lasts, she said, pushing open the door. Rain spilled in as they left, wet footprints marking the hardwood like temporary scars. Silence returned. Only the sound of rain, steady and insistent. Rosa finally exhaled. They really think they can bulldoze this place? Esther picked up her needles again. The metal tips flashed in the light as she began a new row, each stitch deliberate, unhurried. Let them try, she said. Rosa grinned faintly. You've got that look. Esther didn't look up. What look? The one that means somebody's about to regret underestimating you. Esther's lips curved, half smile, half promise. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the mountains. Inside, Esther's knitting tightened, the pattern turning darker with each line, like she was weaving a plan one stitch at a time. And when the lightning flashed through the tall windows, her silver needles gleamed like the edge of something sharper. By afternoon, the rain had deepened into a steady curtain, turning the world outside Esther's bungalow to watercolor gray. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar polish and old paper. Esther moved slowly through the narrow hallway, her slippers whispering against the worn rug until she reached the back room, the one she hadn't entered in years. It was her late husband's study. Dust motes swirled in the weak light as she turned the brass knob. The scent of time, leather, paper, and faint tobacco rose up like memory itself. She flicked on the lamp and set her knitting basket aside. Her fingers, still steady from years of habit, began to sort through boxes labeled co-op records, tax files, old minutes. Each folder was a relic of a time when the community hall had been more than a building. It was a promise made among neighbors. Her eyes caught on a brittle envelope marked Charter 1973. She sat down slowly, opened it with a letter opener, and unfolded the yellowed pages. The ink had faded, but the typewriter's bite was still visible, an old legal document written in formal language. Ownership of the property shall be held collectively by the founding cooperative members, each retaining a fractional deed share. Esther froze. Her pulse quickened. Fractional deed share. Her name was on the list. Faint, but legible. Esther L. Graham. Right beside it, Robert Fields, Rosa's late husband. For a moment she just stared, the sound of rain muffling the shock. 50 years of quiet community gatherings, all under the assumption the hall belonged to the city, or the HOA. But it didn't. Not fully. The co-op had been the true custodian all along. She pressed her lips together, mind whirring with the precise focus of a woman who had solved thousands of equations. They never read the fine print, she murmured. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Rosa calling. Esther? You sound like you're in a library, Rosa said. In a way, I am, Esther replied, the corner of her mouth twitching. You wouldn't happen to have Robert's old paperwork from when this place was built, would you? There was a pause. I kept everything, even the things I shouldn't have. Why? I think, Esther said, unfolding the document again, our knitting circle might own a lot more than yarn. Rosa let out a delighted bark of laughter. Lord have mercy. Tell me you're serious. Serious as the tax code, Esther said. Bring what you have over after dinner. We're going to verify something. By morning, the internet was buzzing with small-town gossip. Marcy Blackwell had posted a meme to the local neighborhood page, a cartoon of two gray-haired women holding knitting needles like pitchforks. The caption read, "Breaking, Stitch and Snitch Squad, plotting to save the haunted bingo barn. Cham dusty doilies, high deadbeats." The comment thread was a wildfire of laughing emojis and HOA supporters chiming in about modernizing the neighborhood. Nina saw it before breakfast. She was scrolling through her phone while her toddler ate cereal beside her. Her thumb hovered over the screen, jaw tightening. Quiet didn't mean powerless. That's what Esther had said. Nina took a screenshot of the post and every comment. Then she opened a folder on her laptop titled Evidence and dropped them in. She wasn't much for confrontation, but she knew how to document things. That afternoon, Esther dialed the county clerk's office. The line rang 3 times before a bored voice answered. Buncombe County Records. How may I direct your call? Yes, Esther said, adjusting her glasses. I need to confirm something regarding a 1973 co-op charter. Property on Maple Ridge Avenue, Community Hall. Do you have a parcel number, ma'am? I have a copy of the original deed, Esther said, her tone polite but sharp enough to make the clerk sit up straighter on the other end. After several minutes of muffled hold music, the voice returned. Well, I'll be damned. You're right. That property still lists multiple deed holders. It's never been fully consolidated under the HOA. Esther's pen scratched across a notepad. Could you send me a certified copy of that record? Yes, ma'am. You'll have it by tomorrow. Thank you, she said, and hung up. She sat there a long while, the phone still warm in her hand, the rain ticking softly on the window pane. Then she leaned back, exhaling. A slow smile spread across her face. Not of victory yet, but recognition. For decades, people had assumed she was just another quiet retiree knitting her afternoons away. But tonight, she'd learned something that changed everything. The pattern wasn't new. It had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. She reached for her knitting bag and pulled out a new skein of yarn, deep burgundy, the color of fresh resolve, and began to cast on a new row. Each loop tightened with purpose, each stitch, a secret waiting to be revealed. And as the yarn grew heavier in her hands, so did the weight of what she now held. The first strand of a plan that could unravel everything Dina Wallace thought she owned. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, the kind of spring light that made the mountains look freshly scrubbed. Esther dressed in her neat gray cardigan and pressed slacks, her hair pinned precisely. To anyone passing, she looked like a retired teacher on her way to run errands. No one would guess she carried a manila folder heavy with the past. Downtown Asheville hummed with weekday bustle, coffee trucks, commuters, a street violinist warming up near the courthouse steps. Esther kept to the quieter side of the block until she reached a narrow brick building with a tarnished brass plate. Harper and Lake, Real Estate Law. Inside, the office smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon polish. A young receptionist looked up. Can I help you, ma'am? I have an appointment with Mr. Lake, Esther said. Her voice was mild, but her eyes gave away nothing. Minutes later, she sat across from a man in his 50s, silver hair at the temples, shirt sleeves rolled up. His desk was crowded but tidy, someone who lived in the gray areas between people's dreams and zoning ordinances. So, he said, glancing at her paperwork, community property, original co-op deed, 1973. That's quite a time capsule. I'm hoping it's more than that, Esther replied. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. His brow furrowed. This language is unusual. It designates individual fractional ownership. That means each founding member retained a deeded percentage. I suspected as much. He kept reading. There's also a clause here about succession. If a member dies, their share passes to their legal heirs unless they relinquish it, and the group can reassign unclaimed shares by vote. Esther leaned forward slightly. So the ownership could be redistributed? With documentation, yes. Proof of lineage, death certificates, surviving family consent. He looked up. If you can produce originals and verify the chain of ownership, you can petition to reaffirm the co-op's title. Esther's pulse quickened, though her tone stayed calm. And that would supersede the HOA's authority? Partially. It complicates any sale or demolition. No developer would touch fractured title rights without complete consolidation. It'd be a financial nightmare. Esther allowed herself a small smile. Good. Mr. Lake studied her, curious. You're planning something, Mrs. Graham. Not planning, she said, gathering the papers into her bag. Correcting. When she stood, the lawyer rose with her. You'll need witnesses when you start collecting signatures. Oh, I have witnesses, she said and buttoned her coat. They knit on Tuesdays. That evening, the community center lights glowed against the darkening sky. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air cool and metallic with promise. Rosa arrived first, arms full of folders and an apple pie wrapped in foil. I brought both fuel and evidence, she said, setting the pie on the table. Nina followed, carrying her knitting tote and a laptop. I still can't believe this is real, she said. I thought HOA documents were just endless fine print. They count on people thinking that, Esther replied, spreading the papers across the table. The hall's overhead light flickered once, then steadied. Like it too, wanted to hear what came next. Each woman took a seat in the familiar circle. Yarn skeins sat beside legal forms, the bright colors soft against the white paper. Esther laid down a pen and pointed to the charter. Each co-op founder had a share. Many of them passed, but some of us, she glanced at Rosa, are still here. And those who aren't left families who might not even know they own a sliver of this place. Rosa's eyes gleamed. So we gather them. Exactly. We hold a vote on record and file it with the clerk. Nina frowned thoughtfully, twirling her knitting needle like a stylus. You mean, we make it official? Esther nodded. We don't fight them in the street. We fight them in the paperwork. Rosa laughed, a sharp bark that echoed off the old wood beams. Lord, Esther, you're about to weaponize knitting needles and legal jargon. I love it. Esther gave her that small, dangerous smile again. They wanted progress. We'll give them process. The women began sorting the folders, marking names, dividing tasks. Nina opened her laptop, typing notes as Esther dictated. The rhythmic clatter of keys mixed with the soft whisper of yarn unraveling. After a while, Rosa leaned back, wiping her glasses. You realize what this means, right? You're outfoxing an HOA with a charter written before disco died. That's what makes it elegant, Esther said. Nina chuckled, looping a strand of crimson yarn around her fingers. I didn't know yarn could be weaponized. Esther looked at her, eyes alight. Oh, Nina, you have no idea. A gust of wind rattled the window just then, startling them all. The hall's door creaked against its hinges, as if something outside had been listening. Esther glanced toward it, expression tightening. Lock it, she said quietly. Rosa moved to the door, turned the bolt, and looked back. Time to make sure they never see this stitch coming. Saturday came wrapped in soft mist, the kind that made the mountains look secretive. Esther stood on the community hall's porch, hands tucked in her coat pockets, watching headlights curve up Maple Ridge Avenue one by one. Every beam that cut through the fog carried another face from the past. By noon, folding chairs filled the hall again. But this time, there were no yarn baskets or coffee mugs. Instead, there were envelopes, notary stamps, and the creak of chairs as people took their places. The air was charged, not with the comfort of routine, but with purpose. Rosa moved between rows, handing out copies of the old charter and a typed agenda. "Sign next to your family's name when we get to it," she said, brisk as a school principal. "If you have a question, ask before we vote. We don't backtrack once it's done." The group murmured with quiet excitement. Sons and daughters of the original co-op founders, some gray-haired, some young enough to still check their phones under the table. They came out of loyalty, curiosity, and a shared flicker of pride in what their parents had built. Esther stepped to the front, her reading glasses low on her nose. "Thank you for coming on short notice," she said. "You've heard the rumors about the HOA's redevelopment plans. Before they can act, we're going to act first." She placed a worn folder on the table. The old deed, reprinted and certified, rested on top. "This hall was deeded to a cooperative. Your parents' cooperative. That ownership was never dissolved. You still hold legal interest in this property." A murmur rolled through the room. Someone whispered, "You mean they can't touch it?" "Not if we reaffirm the shares," Esther said. "We're here to vote on that reallocation clause your families left us. Today, we decide whether this hall remains what it was meant to be." Rosa set a clipboard on the table. "Unanimous vote locks it in. One signature each. Let's make history." Outside, rain began again. Light but steady. The door rattled once under the wind. Then again. Harder. Rosa frowned and crossed to it, but before she reached the handle, a sharp knock echoed through the hall. Dina Wallace's voice carried in like cold air. "Esther, I know you're in there. Open up." Heads turned. Conversations died. Rosa's jaw tightened. She flipped the laminated sign she'd made earlier and hung it on the door handle. "Private meeting in progress." Then she threw the bolt. Dina knocked again, louder this time. "You don't have the authority to hold a vote like this. This is HOA property." Esther's voice stayed calm. "It isn't, Dina. Not legally." "You think this is going to stop progress? You're wasting everyone's time." Inside, Rosa leaned close to the door and said, not quite under her breath, "Your time's already wasted, sweetheart." A few of the attendees stifled chuckles. Esther didn't smile. She turned back to the room. "Let's proceed." One by one, pens scratched paper. Each signature made a sound as small as a heartbeat but felt monumental. People nodded to one another, some wiping away tears, some standing taller than they had in years. When the last person signed, Esther lifted the document and pressed it flat with both palms. "Motion carried," she said softly. "Unanimous." The room broke into quiet applause. Through the glass, Dina's face appeared, flushed with fury, her hand slamming once against the pane before she stormed off into the rain. Rosa exhaled slowly, grinning. She'll love reading about this in the minutes. Esther allowed herself a thin smile. "We'll have them notarized by morning." Her phone buzzed then, lighting up with an unknown number. She stepped aside and answered. "Esther Graham speaking." A rough voice came through. "Tom Cray." "You can't stop this lady," he said, his tone equal parts irritation and threat. "You think you've outsmarted Dina, but you're playing with real money now. You'll get hurt in the fallout." Esther stared out the rain-streaked window at the sign Rosa had hung. "Private meeting in progress," it read, the letters shimmering with water. "Mr. Cray," she said evenly, "you sound nervous. Maybe you should read the charter yourself." He laughed, low and mirthless. "You don't scare me." "You should," Esther said and hung up. She turned back to the hall. The attendees were already stacking chairs, sealing envelopes, and chatting in low tones about the next steps. Rosa handed her a cup of lukewarm coffee. "Phase 1. Rosa said. Done. Esther raised her cup in a small toast. Then let's start phase 2. Outside, a car idled at the curb. Dina sat in the passenger seat, Tom gripping the wheel beside her. Through the fogged windshield, they watched the women lock up the hall. Tom muttered, "She's got something up her sleeve." Dina's glare didn't waver. "Then we'll find out what," and cut the thread before she pulls it tight. By midweek, the mountain air had cleared to a crisp chill that made every color look sharper: the red brick of the community hall, the wet glimmer of asphalt, the silver threads of morning light. Inside, Esther sat at her usual place near the front window, a stack of certified papers spread before her like a chessboard. The county clerk had been efficient. The new deed arrived, stamped, sealed, and perfectly legal. Esther had spent 2 nights reading it line by line, making small but devastating adjustments with the attorney's help. The language was dense, legal scaffolding built to look boring, but every clause hummed with quiet precision. The door opened. Rosa breezed in with her ever-present thermos of coffee and a grin that belonged to someone who already knew a secret. "Tell me you did something wicked." Esther looked up over her glasses. "I did something accurate." Rosa leaned over the table. "Accurate can be wicked if you do it right." Esther slid the top page across. "Here, the revised deed, filed this morning." Rosa scanned the document, mumbling aloud. "Property custodians, Dina Wallace, Marcy Blackwell." "Wait, what?" Esther folded her hands neatly in her lap. "They wanted control. Now they have it." Rosa's laugh started as a snort, then grew until it filled the hall. "You gave them what they wanted, the hard way." Esther allowed herself the faintest smile. "Exactly. As co-responsible custodians, they share financial obligations, maintenance, taxes, repairs. Any attempt to alter or sell the property now requires their signatures and their money." Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. "You're evil, and I love it." By noon, the news reached them. The HOA group chat, usually reserved for fence-color debates, had exploded. Dina's messages came in all caps. "What did you do? Who authorized this?" Marcy's followed seconds later. "Why is my name on a deed?" Rosa read each one aloud, voice shaking with laughter. "She's typing in all caps again. That's how you know she's spiraling." "Let her spiral," Esther said, carefully folding another copy of the deed into an envelope. "This copy's for the bank." The door burst open before Rosa could reply. Dina stormed in, soaked from the drizzle, face flushed with fury. Behind her, Marcy hovered, clutching her phone like it might deflect lightning. "What the hell is this?" Dina snapped, slapping the envelope down on the table. "You think this is funny?" Esther looked up, serene. "No, I think it's legal." Marcy shoved her phone in Esther's face. "My husband's threatening to call our accountant. It says I'm financially responsible for plumbing and roof maintenance. I'm not paying for plumbing." "Then don't," Esther said mildly. "But the city will file liens on all co-custodians equally. I'm sure you'll love explaining that to your husband." Dina's voice sharpened. "You can't possibly think this will hold up." "It already has," Esther said, handing her a certified copy. "Filed under Section 4, Clause 19, the co-op's shared title agreement. You should have read the fine print before you started writing demolition plans." For a moment, silence swallowed the room except for the faint drip of rain from Dina's umbrella. Rosa leaned back in her chair, grinning. "You might want to get a mop too, Dina. You're responsible for leaks now." Marcy's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. "This is harassment." "This is ownership," Esther corrected. Dina snatched the deed, her jaw trembling with restrained rage. "You've made a mistake. I'll fix it." "Of course," Esther said softly. "You'll need my signature for that." The line landed like a needle drop. Sharp, final. Later that afternoon, Dinah and Marcy sat in Tom Cray's office, the blinds drawn, papers strewn across his desk. The realtor's tie was loose, his patience looser. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. "They've effectively turned you into co-investors." "I don't want to invest in that dump," Marcy said, wringing her hands. Tom rubbed his temples. "The problem isn't the dump, it's the bank. I talked to the loan officer this morning. Once they saw the fractured deed, they froze the development funds." Dina blinked. "What do you mean froze?" "They won't release a dime until ownership is consolidated. And thanks to this mess, that could take months, maybe years." The silence was deafening. Dina's manicured nails tapped the desk in slow, furious rhythm. "She played us," Marcy whispered. "No," Dina said, voice low and venomous. "She used us. There's a difference." Tom sighed, sliding the deed across the table. "You want my advice? Don't pick a fight with old ladies who understand the law better than your banker." Dina's eyes went cold. "Oh, I'm not picking a fight," she said. "I'm starting a campaign." Back at the hall, Esther sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Rosa poured them both tea, the kind that smelled faintly of citrus and victory. "Think they've figured it out yet?" Rosa asked. "They're about to," Esther said, eyes still on the rain. "When the bank calls." Rosa raised her cup in a mock toast to red tape and retribution. Esther clinked hers gently, and to never underestimating women with paperwork. Outside, thunder rumbled again, not from weather this time, but from the storm she'd set in motion. By Monday morning, Dina Wallace's office felt like a war zone wrapped in beige. The blinds were half closed. The smell of cold coffee hung in the air, and her laptop pinged non-stop with messages from contractors demanding updates. She stabbed at the keyboard, scrolling through emails until one subject line froze her cold. From Blue Ridge Development Bank. Subject: RE, Maple Ridge Redevelopment, Funding Status. She opened it, eyes narrowing as she read. Due to the property's fractured title and non-consolidated ownership structure, the bank considers the current development plan incompatible with standard financing terms. Funding is suspended pending clarification of deed control. For several seconds, Dina just stared. Then she slammed her palm down so hard her coffee sloshed across the desk. "Suspended?" she hissed. "Because of that old woman's paperwork?" Across the desk, Marcy sat hunched in her chair, phone pressed to her ear. "Greg," she whispered urgently, "they froze the money. No, I don't know why. Something about ownership complications." "What do you mean I signed something?" Dina's voice cut through her call. "They won't release a dime until we consolidate the deed." Marcy paled. "Meaning, until we get Esther's signature." "Exactly." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Dina's jaw tightened. "Then we make her give it." That afternoon, Esther was pruning the rose bushes along her white picket fence when she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Afternoon, Mr. Cray," she said, clipping a stem cleanly. Tom Cray's voice came smooth and practiced, like a salesman who'd spent too long believing his own charm. "Mrs. Graham," he said, stepping closer, his shoes leaving wet prints on the path. "You've made quite the stir downtown." "Paperwork has that effect," she replied. He smiled thinly. "You've complicated things for a lot of people. Important people. Maybe too complicated for your own good." Esther didn't flinch. She straightened, the pruning shears glinting in her gloved hand. "Are you here to threaten me, Mr. Cray? Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between intimidation and desperation." Tom's smile faded. "You don't want this to get ugly." "Ugly?" She stepped closer, the shears still in her hand. "You already made it ugly when you tried to erase our history for profit." Just then, a car door slammed from across the street. Jenna Lawson, Esther's next-door neighbor and the neighborhood's unofficial watchdog, marched over with her phone raised. "Tom Cray," she said sharply. "You have 10 seconds to leave before I call Officer Nolan." He threw up his hands. "I'm just having a conversation." "Good," Jenna said, tapping her screen. "You can have the rest of it at the station." 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Officer Nolan, a tall, soft-spoken man with patient eyes, took Tom aside. Words were exchanged, papers signed, warnings issued. When it was done, Nolan tipped his hat toward Esther. "If he bothers you again, call directly. He's on record now." Esther nodded. "Thank you, officer." Tom muttered something under his breath as he walked off, his confidence leaking with every step. Jenna smirked. "Didn't even have to raise your voice, huh?" Esther smiled faintly. "No need, paperwork's louder." Across town, Nina Tran was sitting in her small studio above the fiber co-op, a tangle of yarn and spreadsheets open beside her. She'd spent the morning researching zoning codes, and now she spotted it. One violation after another. Dina's luxury duplex coming soon sign violated 3 ordinances: placement on public right-of-way, unregistered signage, and false permit posting. Nina took screenshots, attached documentation, and filed the complaint under her name. She hesitated only once before pressing submit. An hour later, an auto-confirmation email pinged her inbox. Complaint received. Zoning inspection scheduled within 72 hours. Nina smiled to herself. "Consider that your stitch in time, Dina." Meanwhile, chaos brewed in the Wallace household. Dina's husband, Jeff, stood at the kitchen island holding the tax notice. "Are you kidding me?" he barked. "They've added your name to the deed, which means our name is now liable for property taxes on that falling-apart hall." "It's temporary," Dina snapped. "Once I fix the title, it'll clear." "Fix it?" He jabbed the paper toward her. "You caused it. You and your little HOA empire." Marcy called mid-argument, her voice shrill on speaker. "Greg says we can't afford it either. He's refusing to cover my share of the taxes. I'm selling my Peloton to pay property bills, Dina. Property bills!" Dina hung up mid-rant, her face blotchy with rage. "This isn't over," she muttered. Across Maple Ridge, Rosa was at the hall, setting up a table covered with pies, brownies, and a handmade sign. "Bake sale, save our center, and irritate the HOA." The smell of sugar and cinnamon drifted through the neighborhood. People stopped by out of curiosity. They left smiling, arms full of treats and gossip. When Esther arrived, Rosa handed her a receipt jar already half full. "We've raised $300. "For repairs?" Esther asked. Rosa grinned. "For spite. Repairs are secondary." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that came from triumph layered with disbelief. That evening, Esther walked home beneath a streaked sunset. Her garden glowed faintly in the fading light. For the first time in weeks, she let herself relax, until her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. The bank's just the beginning." No name, just the echo of something ugly beneath the words. Esther stood there, watching the horizon fade to violet. Then she slipped her phone into her pocket and whispered to herself, "Good. I'm just getting started." The morning after the anonymous text, Nina Tran sat in her studio, the same rain-smeared window framing the mountains that had watched over generations. Her laptop glowed in the dim light. Coffee cooled beside her, untouched. She'd been awake all night, the adrenaline of the last few days still pulsing through her fingertips. The zoning complaint had gone through. The city inspector had already cited Dina's illegal sign, but it wasn't enough. People needed to know what was really happening on Maple Ridge. She opened a blank page and began to type. Title: "The Knitting Circle That Outsmarted the HOA by Nina Tran." They called them the Stitch and Snitch Squad. They said they were irrelevant, outdated, and in the way of progress. But when a group of retired women discovered that their community hall was being quietly targeted for demolition, They did what developers never expected. They fought back with paperwork, patience, and precision. Her words poured out faster than she could think, part outrage, part admiration. She wrote about Esther's quiet resolve, Rosa's sharp humor, the history of the co-op and its buried charter, the manipulation by the HOA, and how, stitch by stitch, these women had turned bureaucracy into a weapon. By noon, she hit publish. The post went live on her art blog, usually reserved for fiber tutorials and photos of yarn-dyed sunsets. But within hours, the traffic counter shot past anything she'd ever seen. Comments flooded in. Neighbors, strangers, people from other small towns writing, "We've had the same problem." By evening, a local reporter reached out. "Hi, Nina. This is Claire Atwell from the Asheville Gazette. Would love to talk about your post. The story's making rounds on social media." Nina blinked at the message. Then she called Esther. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "I'm always sitting down when news starts like that," Esther said dryly. "The Gazette wants to interview you. They saw the post." Esther was quiet for a long moment. "I told you quiet doesn't mean powerless," she said finally. The interview took place 2 days later in the community hall. Claire Atwell arrived with a camera crew and a notebook full of questions. The knitting circle had prepared. Fresh flowers on the table, coffee brewing, a plate of Rosa's lemon squares already half-eaten. Claire leaned forward. "So tell me, how did you manage to stall a multi-million-dollar development with yarn and legal forms?" Esther smiled, polite but sharp. "With clarity," she said. "Developers build fast. We read slow. That's how they miss the fine print." Rosa chimed in, eyes twinkling. "And we've got better snacks." Laughter broke through the room. Nina, off to the side, recorded everything on her phone. A week later, the Gazette ran the feature online and in print. Headline: "The Women Who Outsmarted Developers." Subhead: "How a Knitting Circle Turned Legal Loopholes into a Lifeline for Their Town." By the next morning, it wasn't just Asheville reading it. State blogs, Facebook groups, even a local radio station picked it up. Someone turned Rosa's quote into a meme. "They build fast, we read slow." Esther's mailbox overflowed with letters, handwritten envelopes from towns across the country. Some came from retirees wanting advice. Others came from younger women asking for the charter template Esther had used. One letter was postmarked from Maine, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You made us believe small people still count." Esther read it twice before setting it on her mantel beside her knitting basket. Meanwhile, Dina and Marcy were watching the media storm with rising panic. "Do you see this?" Dina hissed, slamming the Gazette down in front of Marcy. "They're calling us villains." Marcy winced. "They didn't name us." "They didn't have to," Dina snapped. "Everyone knows." Determined to set the record straight, Dina organized a protest in front of the hall. She drafted flyers, posted on Facebook, even bribed a few HOA members with Starbucks gift cards. The day arrived, and so did 3 people. 2 were her cousins. The third was Tom Cray, eating a corn dog. Across the street, a handful of teens filmed on their phones while Rosa hung a fresh sign on the hall's door. "Private property, protected by co-op rights and common sense." Dina shouted something about fake news and illegal manipulation. Her voice echoed against the wet pavement, unanswered. Rosa, standing on the porch beside Esther, called down sweetly, "You might want to start smaller next time. Maybe a book club?" Dina cursed under her breath and stormed off, her tiny protest dissolving into drizzle. Rosa turned to Esther, her grin wicked. "Got you a present," she said, pulling something from her tote bag. A knitted scarf, soft gray wool, the letters stitched in bold burgundy. HOA, Hysterical Overreach Alliance. Esther laughed, a sound that cracked through the quiet like sunlight through cloud. "You shouldn't have," she said, but she wrapped it around her neck anyway. It suits you, Rosa said. Doesn't it? Though. The two women stood side by side as the last of the protesters disappeared around the corner. The Gazette's front page fluttered against a passing breeze, snagging briefly on the hall's fence before tumbling into the puddled street. In bold print, the headline gleamed through the damp: "The Women Who Outsmarted Developers." The morning after the protest, Esther's mailbox overflowed, not with letters this time, but with official envelopes. She sorted them on her kitchen table like a dealer setting down cards. Bank correspondence, city clerk verification, notarized minutes from the vote. Every paper shimmered with the cool authority of bureaucracy, the quiet power of things done properly. She slid the last envelope aside and reached for the phone. "Mr. Lake," she said when her attorney picked up. "It's time." By noon, the sound of a fax machine hummed through the small downtown office where Tom Cray sat slouched behind his desk. He rubbed his temples, eyes bloodshot from another night spent chasing damage control. The paper curled out of the machine, page after page of legal formalities, stamped and signed. A cover letter, neatly typed, read, "To whom it may concern." Enclosed, please find the official co-op minutes, certified vote tallies, and recorded deed allocation per County Ordinance 12B. All records are current, complete, and legally binding. Regards, Esther L. Graham. Tom swore under his breath. "She's good," he muttered. The lawyer's signature at the bottom left no room for interpretation. Every procedural step had been documented, meetings recorded, signatures authenticated, votes notarized. It was an airtight wall of paperwork, built stitch by stitch. When Dina barged in moments later, he tossed the packet across the desk. "Read it." Her manicured hand trembled as she flipped through the pages. "This can't be right," she whispered. "There has to be a loophole." Tom leaned back. "If there is, she's already closed it." That same afternoon, Marcy sat on her porch surrounded by unopened mail. Greg had stopped answering her texts. When she finally tore into one of the envelopes, her face drained of color. Notice of shared custodial responsibility. Roof maintenance assessment, 8,126. Payment due within 30 days. She read it twice, then 3 more times, as if the numbers might shrink under her disbelief. $8,000? She shrieked, startling a passing dog walker. "For shingles." Her phone buzzed. A text from Dina. "Stay calm. We'll launch a fundraiser." The fundraiser appeared that night. "Save Our Neighborhood Legacy." A GoFundMe plastered with stock photos of smiling children and tree-lined streets. The irony was almost poetic, but the internet had a long memory. Within hours, the comments section filled with locals linking screenshots of past HOA fines, snide remarks, and Marcy's infamous Dusty Doilies meme. By morning, the campaign had raised $23, and one of those was from Rosa, just to write in the note, "For the doilies." When Marcy called Dina in tears, Dina's voice cracked. "I can't believe people are mocking us like this." Rosa's laughter echoed in another corner of town. "Oh, honey," she said when Esther showed her the fundraiser, "you don't knit lies into the internet without tangling a few threads." 2 days later, Nina arrived at the hall with a bundle of bright yarn under her arm. She cleared a corner of the wall, hammered in 2 small hooks, and began looping strands together, burgundy and gold, colors of resilience and triumph. When Rosa wandered in, powdered sugar from a cinnamon bun dusting her sweater, she stopped short. "What's that supposed to say?" Nina smiled, her hands working fast. "It's a reminder." An hour later, the banner stretched proudly across the front of the hall in bold stitched letters, "Owned in full, paid in yarn." Esther stood beside her, the late morning sun catching the silver in her hair. "You've got a flair for symbolism," she said. Nina laughed. "I learned from the best." Inside, the table was covered in warm cinnamon buns, mugs of coffee, and fresh copies of the certified deed. The women gathered around, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. Someone turned on the old record player in the corner. Bill Withers, Lovely Day. Esther held her mug like a trophy. You know, she said, I think they thought we'd tire ourselves out by now. Rosa tore a piece of bun and grinned. We're just getting our second wind. Nina lifted her phone to capture the moment. 3 generations of women. Steady. Victorious. Surrounded by the hum of their own making. Across town, Dina watched the Gazette's online feed, where a new headline was trending. Local HOA faces collapse after viral knitting circle triumph. Her reflection in the laptop screen looked older, tighter around the eyes. She slammed it shut. They're not done, she muttered. They think this is over, but I'll find something. Everyone's got a loose thread somewhere. That night, back at the community hall, Esther lingered after everyone left. The lights were low, the room quiet except for the faint tick of the clock on the wall. She traced a fingertip along the banner Nina had made. The yarn was soft, sturdy, the kind that wouldn't fray easily. Then, somewhere outside, an engine started. Headlights flashed across the front windows. Esther didn't move. But her expression sharpened, measured, calm. Whoever was watching would see only an old woman in a knit shawl, standing beneath a banner of victory. But inside her, the next stitch was already forming. By late spring, the air in Asheville smelled of wet lilac and fresh paint, signs of a town moving forward. But on Maple Ridge Avenue, progress had slowed to a crawl, and no one felt it more painfully than Dinah Wallace. She sat stiffly in the municipal building's echoing lobby, tapping a manicured nail against the plastic armrest. Across from her, a clerk stapled papers with the weary patience of someone who'd seen too many appeals die the same quiet death. A door opened. Mrs. Wallace? Dina stood instantly, chin high. The zoning officer handed her a thin packet, 3 stapled pages, one stamped in bold red letters. Denied. She blinked, refusing to let the word sink in. There must be a mistake, she said. He shook his head. The city can't approve construction on a property with unresolved liens and multi-party ownership. Until every deed holder signs off, the permit's void. But that hall is falling apart, she snapped. He shrugged. So fix it. You own part of it now. That afternoon, Rosa found Esther in the hall's tiny office, surrounded by file boxes and the faint hum of the old copy machine. Tell me that look on your face means what I think it means, Rosa said, setting down her coffee. Esther smiled, a small surgical thing. Dina's final appeal just failed. Rosa let out a laugh that rattled the window panes. Hallelujah, and pass the cinnamon buns. Esther slid a form across the table, already signed, stamped, and dated. And this, she said, is the follow-up. A lien for unpaid property taxes under the co-responsibility clause. She owes $6,000. Rosa whistled low. You're weaponizing arithmetic now? Just balance, Esther said. She wanted ownership. Now she gets the bill. Across town, Dina's phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from contractors, voicemails from creditors, and finally, a terse message from her husband. Dina, I told you not to drag us into this. I'm not covering your half anymore. Handle it yourself. When she tried to reach Tom, the number rang twice and went to voicemail. At that same moment, Tom Cray was packing up his desk. His nameplate sat face down beside a letter of termination from Blue Ridge Realty. Breach of ethics. That was the phrase they'd used. He'd violated state realtor codes by misrepresenting ownership in the development application. He looked at the city's skyline through his office window and muttered, all this over a bunch of grandmas with yarn. Then, almost admiringly, damn impressive. Meanwhile, back on Maple Ridge, the mood was anything but somber. Rosa stood on a stepladder out front, her sun hat tilted back, holding a paintbrush steady as she filled in the last bold letters on the community center's new sign. Owned by old ladies. Nina clapped from below. You think that's too subtle? Rosa laughed. Let 'em read between the lines. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, neighbors, passers-by, even a few former skeptics. The hall buzzed again with life. The smell of coffee, the scrape of chairs, the low hum of conversation. Inside, Nina laid out a row of freshly folded sweaters on the long oak table. Each one carried a stitched phrase, read the fine print on one sleeve, Maple Ridge Strong across the chest. She'd opened an online shop that morning, half the proceeds going to the local literacy fund. Within hours, orders poured in from all over the state. Esther held one up, the soft blue yarn catching the afternoon light. You've started something, Nina. Nina smiled. You did, Esther. I just gave it color. Later that evening, when the laughter and chatter had faded and the hall stood quiet again, Esther returned to her desk to lock away the new deeds. She paused when she noticed an unfamiliar envelope slid under the door. No return address. Heavy cream paper. Official seal. She opened it carefully. Inside, a letter typed on formal stationery. North Carolina Heritage and Preservation Commission, Mrs. Graham. After reviewing recent media coverage and your submitted documentation of historical ownership, we would like to discuss the potential designation of the Maple Ridge Community Hall as a protected historical landmark. This would grant state preservation funding and permanent protection from redevelopment. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Esther read it twice, the edges of the page trembling slightly between her fingers. The hall, protected forever. No loopholes left to exploit, no contracts to twist. She set the letter on the desk, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Rosa's voice echoed in her head. You don't knit lies into the world without tangling a few threads. Well, this was the last one. But as she turned to lock the door, she caught a faint glimmer through the window, a camera flash from across the street. Quick and deliberate. Esther froze, her expression turning to steel. Someone was still watching, still trying to pull the thread. She reached up and drew the curtain closed. The next morning, sunlight broke clean over the Blue Ridge peaks, slicing through the mist that clung to Maple Ridge like a memory reluctant to fade. Esther sat at her kitchen table, the landmark commission letter open beside her oatmeal. Her tea had gone cold hours ago. She wasn't reading the letter anymore. She was thinking about what it meant. For 50 years, this building had been the backdrop of her life. Birthdays, funerals, choir rehearsals, shelter during hurricanes. Her husband's laughter echoing off those same wood floors when they were young and newly married. The idea that the state might finally recognize the hall's worth. It was justice, yes, but also legacy. She folded the letter carefully and dialed a number. Nina, she said, bring your laptop and every file you've got. We're going to tell the state who we really are. By afternoon, the community hall looked more like an archive than a gathering place. Boxes of photographs, faded flyers, and brittle meeting minutes blanketed every table. Nina sat cross-legged on the floor, scanning pictures into her laptop while Rosa methodically labeled stacks with sticky notes. Good grief, Rosa muttered, squinting at an old photo of the co-op founders. Look at my hair. I look like I lost a fight with a wind tunnel. Esther chuckled. It's authentic history. They'll love it. Nina smiled as she adjusted the scanner. You know, the commission wants proof of community impact. We've got everything. Potlucks, charity drives, even those blood donation records from the 80s. Add the knitting classes, Esther said. We've taught 3 generations in this hall. That counts for something. Rosa grinned. Especially since one of them went on to design sweaters for Patagonia. The hall buzzed with energy, a blend of nostalgia and purpose. For hours, they cataloged memories, each photo a story, each yellowed document a thread in the tapestry of Maple Ridge's shared past. When Nina finally looked up from her screen, dusk was falling through the stained glass windows, casting soft patterns of amber and rose across the tables. "We've built a legacy file," she said. 6 gigabytes of proof that this place is the heart of the neighborhood. Esther smiled, eyes glinting with pride. "Now we send it off and let the truth do the rest." But truth had a way of attracting interference. The next morning, Dina's car screeched to a halt in front of the hall. She stormed inside, waving a folder like a flag. "You can't submit this," she barked. "You didn't get HOA approval." Rosa, mid-coffee sip, didn't even stand. "Oh, good morning to you too, sunshine." Dina slammed the folder on the table. "You can't just make this place a landmark. It affects zoning for the entire block. Property values will drop." Esther folded her arms. "Then maybe you shouldn't have bought next to history." Dina's mouth opened, but no words came. She spun on her heel and stormed out, muttering something about lawyers. Rosa leaned back, amused. "She's really not used to losing gracefully." "She'll have to practice," Esther said calmly. "She'll need the skill." 2 days later, Rosa found something unexpected while reviewing the MLS listings for research purposes. "Esther," she said, her voice low and gleeful over the phone, "you'll never believe what our friend Tom did." "Do tell." "He tried to relist the community hall on the multiple listing service, pretending it was an investment parcel, without your consent." "That's illegal," Esther said, tone sharp now. "Exactly. And guess who I just emailed? The North Carolina Realtor Ethics Board." A week later, Tom Cray's name hit the local news again, this time under a less flattering headline. "Local realtor fined for fraudulent listing. Did not have authority to sell." His photo appeared beside the article, red-faced and glum. Rosa clipped it out and pinned it to the community hall bulletin board under Good News. "Think he'll frame it?" she quipped. Esther smiled. "Probably not in his office." That afternoon, as rain whispered against the roof, Esther sat by the hall's front window, knitting needles clicking softly. Nina entered, waving a thick envelope. "It's here," she said breathlessly, "from the commission." Rosa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Don't just stand there. Open it." Nina tore the seal, her fingers trembling slightly, then read aloud. "The North Carolina Heritage and Preservation Commission hereby designates Maple Ridge Community Hall as a protected historical landmark. The property will receive perpetual preservation status and state maintenance funding effective immediately." The room went silent for a heartbeat, and then Rosa whooped, loud enough to shake the windows. She grabbed Esther's hands, spinning her once like they were young again. "You did it, woman!" she shouted. "You saved it for good." Nina smiled, eyes wet. "No, we did." Esther looked around, the laughter, the smell of cinnamon and coffee, the hum of belonging filling the air. "They tried to write us out," she said quietly. "We rewrote the ending." Rosa pulled her into a hug. "That's because you never drop a stitch." As the rain eased, the three women stepped outside to hang a new plaque the state had sent along with the letter. It gleamed bronze against the brick wall. "Maple Ridge Community Hall, Esther 1973. Protected Historical Landmark." A small crowd gathered to watch. Applause rippled down the street. From across the road, someone sat in a dark car, engine running, camera lens pointed straight at them. The shutter clicked once, twice, capturing their joy like a target marked for later. Esther caught the movement just before the car pulled away. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the plaque tightened. The hall was safe now. But the people protecting it? That was another matter entirely. The morning the lien arrived, the air felt heavier. Humid. Restless. like the mountain storms that came without warning. Marcy Blackwell stood barefoot in her kitchen, clutching the certified envelope from the county treasurer's office as if it were radioactive. Her husband, Greg, sat at the table with his coffee and the newspaper, pretending not to notice her pacing. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Notice of delinquent property share, co-custodian, Marcy L. Blackwell is hereby informed that unpaid maintenance assessments and proportional property taxes totaling $4,327 have been forwarded for lien enforcement. The paper fluttered as she read. Her breath hitched. $4,000? Greg didn't look up. Shouldn't have signed your name where it didn't belong. I didn't sign anything. Esther tricked me into it. Pretty sure you called it taking control? Back when you were bragging to your friends, he muttered. Marcy slammed the counter with the flat of her hand. This isn't my fault. Dina said she'd handle it. Then call Dina, Greg said, pushing his chair back. But don't look at me for a bailout. I warned you when you joined that HOA circus. He left his mug half full and walked out. The front door closed with the finality of punctuation. By noon, Marcy was in her car, hands slick on the steering wheel as she called Dina for the third time. Finally, the line picked up. What now? Dina's voice sounded exhausted, brittle. Did you see this? The lien notice? Marcy said, her tone an octave too high. They're saying I owe $4,000. I can't pay that. Dina exhaled sharply. Marcy, I've got my own problems. The city's still threatening to audit me over that permit fiasco. I don't have time to fix your mess too. My mess? Your plan got us into this. Don't start with me, Dina snapped. You wanted influence, remember? Let's modernize the neighborhood, you said. Congratulations. You're a property investor now. Dina, please, Marcy said, voice cracking. Just help me cover it. I'll pay you back. But the line went dead. Marcy stared at her phone screen, blinking hard. Outside her windshield, clouds gathered over the ridgeline like a dark promise. The next morning, she stood in line at the post office, clutching a folder of tax notices and legal letters, ready to mail them with the hope of buying herself time. The line moved slowly, the room buzzing with chatter and the metallic clink of the stamp machine. Then a calm voice behind her said, "Morning, Marcy." She turned and froze. Esther Graham stood there, neatly dressed as always, a small envelope in one hand, a faint smile on her lips. Marcy's face flushed. "What do you want?" "I just came to drop off a letter," Esther said mildly, "and to make you an offer." Marcy stiffened. "You're joking." Esther handed her a folded note, written in careful script, offer to purchase, fractional co-ownership share, $1 USD. Marcy's jaw dropped. "You're trying to humiliate me." "I'm trying to clean up the deed," Esther said softly. "You're free to decline, but if the lien goes through, the county will auction your share anyway." A hush rippled through the post office as a few people turned to look. Marcy's face burned red. "You think you've won, don't you?" "This isn't about winning," Esther said, her voice low and steady. "It's about responsibility, and sometimes that costs less than pride." The silence broke like glass. Marcy's voice rose, shrill and shaking. "You think you can just buy me out for $1?" A clerk peered over the counter. Someone dropped a package. Esther didn't flinch. "I think you'll feel lighter when you do." Marcy's hands trembled. For a second, Esther thought she might throw the letter at her. Instead, Marcy let out a strangled sound, half laugh, half sob, and stormed out, shoving the door open so hard it slammed the wall. Across the lobby, Nina sat quietly in a side booth, pretending to seal an envelope. Her phone, angled just right, caught everything. Marcy's shouting, Esther's composure, the moment of collapse in broad daylight. That evening, Nina uploaded the clip to her blog with a short caption. The deed's worth more than dollars. Sometimes justice costs exactly what it should. The video spread fast, shared on local groups, then regional feeds. Comments poured in. Queen behavior. Teach me your ways, Esther. Dollar deals. $1 million impact. At the hall that night, the knitting circle gathered again. The air was warm with the smell of cinnamon and chamomile tea. Rosa raised her glass of sweet tea in mock ceremony. To Esther, she said, who bought out her enemy for less than the price of a parking meter. Laughter rippled around the room. Esther smiled, but her gaze wandered to the window, where the reflection of streetlights shimmered across the glass. Not enemies, she said quietly, just loose threads. Rosa clinked her glass against Esther's. Then here's to tying them off. The circle toasted, their laughter filling the old hall with warmth again. But outside, parked halfway down the street, that same dark car idled. Engine off, windows rolled up. Inside, a camera lens glimmered faintly, pointed toward the glowing windows of the community center. The heat came early that summer, thick and heavy, the kind that made the mountain air feel closer, tighter. It hung over Maple Ridge like a held breath. Esther was sitting by the open window in the community hall, the curtains fluttering lazily, when Rosa walked in holding a manila envelope and a look of dangerous satisfaction. They blinked, Rosa said. County finally processed my lien paperwork. Esther glanced up. Already? Rosa grinned, tapping the envelope against her palm. They said since Marcy's share was tied up in unpaid dues, the county court expedited the process. Legal action's underway. Once it clears, her name's coming off the deed. A quiet pause, followed by Esther's measured smile. Another loose thread tied off. Rosa took a seat. Feels more like snipping it clean. 3 weeks later, the notice arrived. Marcy L. Blackwell, ownership revoked, lien enforced. The hall erupted with applause when Esther pinned the letter to the bulletin board. Even Nina filmed it for her blog, the caption reading, Paperwork, the most underrated power tool in America. Rosa chuckled, her eyes bright. That woman's going to wake up one morning and realize she doesn't even own the mistake she made. Let's hope she takes it as a lesson, Esther said, though her voice carried no conviction. Because she knew, people like Dina and Marcy didn't learn lessons. They simply regrouped. And regroup Dina did. For a month she tried everything. Appeals, calls, one last desperate meeting with her lawyer. But the math refused to bend. Her remaining stake in the property had become a liability. The property tax bill came next, thick as a novel. $6,734, due immediately. When she told her husband, he stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Sell your share." Dina felt the word sell like a slap. The next day, she drove to the county office in silence. The hall's deed folder sat open on the clerk's desk. Esther's name gleaming at the top, listed as primary custodian. Dina's eyes lingered on it for a long, bitter second before she signed her release. The clerk slid the papers across to her. "Once this is recorded," he said, "you'll no longer be responsible for the property or its taxes." Dina managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good," she said. "Let her have it." When she stepped outside into the sunlight, it was too bright, too clean, like a town that had quietly decided it didn't need her anymore. That evening, Esther received an email from the county recorder's office. Transfer complete. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she read it, a slow, steady breath leaving her chest. After months of conflict, her ownership was no longer partial, theoretical, or symbolic. She held majority control of the Maple Ridge Community Hall. She forwarded the notice to Rosa and Nina with a single line. "We did it." Within minutes, Rosa replied, "About damn time." Nina followed with a flurry of heart emojis and one sentence. This deserves a celebration and a microphone. The following Friday night, the hall pulsed with music and chatter. Handmade posters lined the walls. Yarn and justice. Stories of community and courage. Nina stood at the front, her curls pulled back, microphone in hand. We built this night to celebrate what can happen when small voices stitch together into something unbreakable. The room cheered. Teenagers read poems about resilience. An elderly man shared how the hall once sheltered his family during a flood. Rosa told a story about her late husband nailing the first plank into the foundation. Then Esther took the stage. The applause quieted as she adjusted the mic, her voice soft but clear. "This hall isn't just a building," she said. "It's proof that history doesn't belong to those who write the biggest checks. It belongs to those who refuse to sign it away." The crowd rose to its feet. Rosa leaned over to Nina, whispering, "She could run for mayor, you know?" Nina laughed. "She already runs this town, just with yarn instead of policy." By the next morning, word spread quietly through Maple Ridge. Marcy Blackwell had sold her house. A moving truck idled in her driveway as neighbors watched from behind blinds. No one waved. She didn't look back when she drove away. Her for sale sign clattered in the wind, half loose from the ground until a gust finally knocked it over. Rosa happened to walk by on her morning stroll. She stooped, picked it up, and smiled to herself before setting it against a trash can. That afternoon, Esther stood alone in the community hall. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, illuminating every framed photo, every preserved memory they had fought for. The banner still hung on the far wall, owned in full, paid in yarn. She exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it all settle. But then she noticed something. An envelope slid halfway under the door. No return address, just her name typed neatly across the front. She bent down, opened it, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "Mrs. Graham, you've won your haul, but every thread frays eventually. Be careful what you weave next." Her heart steadied, then slowed. She looked toward the curtained windows, her reflection staring back. The hall was hers now, but someone out there still wanted it to unravel. The morning broke bright and electric, the kind of day where sunlight seemed to hum against the glass. Esther adjusted the microphone clipped to her cardigan and took in the swarm of cameras, cables, and chatter flooding the community hall. The Asheville Channel 5 crew had turned the place into a small studio, tripods wedged between knitting tables, cables snaking past baskets of yarn. The hand-painted banner behind her, "Owned in full, paid in yarn," framed the scene perfectly. "Ready, Mrs. Graham?" the producer asked. Esther nodded, smoothing her sleeve. She wasn't nervous. Not really. After everything they'd faced, a few cameras couldn't rattle her. The red light blinked on. The reporter, a young woman in a blue blazer, smiled brightly. "We're here with Esther Graham, the 74-year-old retired teacher whose knitting circle saved a historic community hall from demolition and changed local property law in the process. Mrs. Graham, people are calling you the architect of a movement. How do you respond?" Esther tilted her head slightly, her voice calm and deliberate. "We weren't fighting for fame. We were fighting for a place to belong. The Knitting Circle isn't just a hobby group. It's a strategic board of legacy defense. We protect what matters, stitch by stitch." The reporter blinked, impressed. "A strategic board?" Rosa chuckled from the back row, whispering to Nina, "She's been waiting her whole life to drop that line." The interview continued, Esther's words measured yet magnetic. She spoke of fairness, preservation, and the quiet power of ordinary citizens armed with patience and paperwork. When it ended, the crew clapped softly, a rare thing. As they packed up, Jenna Lawson, the neighborhood's watchful protector, stepped forward. In her hand was a small velvet box. "Esther," she said, voice thick with pride. "The city council asked me to deliver this. Official recognition for your advocacy work." Esther opened the box. Inside gleamed a gold medal embossed with the seal of Asheville, Community Advocate Award. She smiled, warm, humbled, but behind her eyes that flicker of steel still burned. "You shouldn't have," she said softly. "Oh, I absolutely should have," Jenna replied. Rosa clapped her hands once. "Well, that's it. You've gone from knitter to legend." Esther shook her head. "Legends fade. This hall won't." That same week, another kind of recognition arrived. Less polished, less voluntary. A letter from the city's finance department landed on Dinah Wallace's doorstep, stamped Urgent Audit Notice. The document outlined discrepancies between her permit filings and the HOA's expenditures, missing funds, fabricated maintenance costs, improper filings for community upgrades that never existed. When she read it, Dina's knees nearly gave out. She sat down hard on her front steps, the paper trembling in her hand. From across the street, a neighbor watering his azaleas gave her a polite, pitying nod. Dina didn't wave back. That afternoon, she called Tom Cray, only to find his number disconnected. For the first time since the fight began, she realized she was completely alone. Meanwhile, at the community hall, Rosa stood on a stepladder again, the smell of fresh paint filling the air. The plaque she'd been working on all morning gleamed under the afternoon light. The old inscription, Maple Ridge Community Hall, Est, 1973, was now joined by new words, etched carefully beneath, "Woven, not broken." She stepped down, wiping her hands on a rag, and admired her work. Nina snapped a photo. "That's perfect," she said, "like a motto for survival." Rosa smiled. "It's our signature. You don't come through hell just to hang up something ordinary." Inside, Esther sat at her desk, the Golden Advocate medal now resting on the mantel beside the deed folder. The hall buzzed faintly behind her. People chatting, kids laughing in the doorway, the sound of belonging alive again. She opened the folder, running a fingertip over the crisp edge of the deed. The ink gleamed under the desk lamp. Her victory had been hard-won, legal and moral. But one detail still pulled at her thoughts like a loose thread: ownership. She'd done this to save the hall for the community, not for herself. And while she'd earned her name on the top line, she knew better than anyone that nothing lasted if held too tightly by one pair of hands. That evening, as the sun sank over the mountains, the knitting circle gathered for their usual Tuesday session. The scent of coffee and sugar filled the air, but this time there was something else. A quiet anticipation. Esther stood and cleared her throat. "I have one more piece of business to finish." Rosa raised a brow. "You're not suing anyone, are you? Because I'm out of folders." Laughter rippled through the group. Esther smiled, shaking her head. "No lawsuits. Just an amendment." She placed a single-page document on the table. "I've asked our attorney to update the deed one last time. Each of you, Rosa, Nina, Jenna, and everyone who stood by this hall, will have a permanent legacy share. It means your names, and your family's names, will be tied to this building forever." Nina blinked. "Esther, that's fair," Esther said softly. "I started this fight, but you all finished it. The hall belongs to the ones who showed up, not just the one who signed the paperwork." For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking and the faint patter of rain against the windows. Rosa wiped at her eyes. "You old genius," she whispered. Esther smiled faintly, just closing the loop. They signed the amendment together, pen strokes slow and deliberate, each one echoing with meaning. When the last signature dried, Rosa raised her mug. "To ownership, the honest kind." They toasted. Outside, lightning flashed far off in the mountains, white against the darkening sky. The rain came harder now, drumming the roof like applause. Esther turned toward the window, the reflection of her friends behind her, a circle of laughter, strength, and legacy. Her eyes narrowed slightly, catching something through the blur of rain. The same dark car, parked farther down the street, motionless. She exhaled once, calm but unyielding. "Let them watch," she murmured. "We're not unraveling anymore." The summer thunder had passed, leaving the air crisp and washed clean. On Maple Ridge Avenue, the community hall glowed beneath the morning sun, brick walls warm, windows shining, and the faint scent of rain still lingering in the grass. Esther stood on the front steps in overalls spattered with primer, squinting at the hall's weathered door. Its paint, a dull and flaking beige, had seen better decades. "Burgundy," Nina said, holding up the sample card like it was scripture, "the color of courage and cinnamon rolls." Esther smiled. "And bad wine. Perfect." They dipped their brushes and the first strokes went on bold and smooth, rich color soaking into the old wood. Nina hummed softly as she worked, some folksy tune that wove itself into the morning breeze. "You know," Esther said, "I never thought I'd be here this long, still painting the same door I first opened in '73. Nina's brush paused. "You think about leaving?" "Not for a second," Esther said, "but I do think about how to leave it better." They worked in companionable silence for a while, each brushstroke sealing years of laughter, grief, and defiance into the wood grain. When the final coat dried, Esther stepped back. The color glowed, a deep burgundy that looked alive in the light. "There," she said softly. "It looks like it's breathing again." Nina smiled, wiping her hands on her jeans. "It's home." By August, the Maple Ridge Community Hall was booked solid. Flyers papered the corkboard by the door. Art night, every first Friday. Free health screenings, sponsored by St. Luke's. Community literacy classes, enroll today. On any given evening, the place pulsed with life, music spilling from one room, laughter from another. Teenagers painted murals in the basement while seniors learned basic computer skills upstairs. And at the center of it all was Esther, clipboard in hand, moving from room to room like a quiet conductor. Rosa caught her one afternoon, standing in the doorway of the main hall, watching two young mothers teach their kids to finger knit. "You know," Rosa said, "we used to be the ones running around like that." "We still are," Esther replied, smiling, "just with better shoes." Rosa snorted. "Speak for yourself. My bunions disagree." One morning, Rosa arrived late to knitting circle, unusual for her. She burst through the door, windblown and grinning. "You'll never guess what just happened," she said, tossing a letter onto the table. "UNC Asheville invited me to speak at their Community Leadership Forum next month." Nina's jaw dropped. "You're kidding. About what?" Rosa grinned wider. "About grassroots governance and women-led resistance." Esther raised an eyebrow. "In other words, how to outwit bureaucrats with sass and stationery." "Exactly." Rosa laughed, then softened. "I think they want to hear how we did this, how we kept the hall, how we didn't back down." "You tell them," Esther said. "That paperwork and persistence beat bulldozers every time." Rosa nodded. "I'll tell them the truth, that the biggest power in the world is women with a shared purpose." As fall neared, the circle grew larger. Younger women began showing up, some from the literacy classes, others from the art nights. They came with notebooks and nervous smiles, asking for guidance. Esther and Rosa welcomed them in. They taught them more than just knitting: budgeting, zoning rights, how to read a permit, how to push back with grace. "We don't just make scarves," Rosa told them one evening, her voice carrying across the hall. "We make legacy." Nina filmed the moment for the blog, her caption reading, "The next generation of yarn defenders." Esther watched from her corner, quiet pride softening her usually sharp gaze. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived on city letterhead. The handwriting on the front, Mayor Lillian Graves, was unmistakable. Esther slid it open with her knitting needle, smiling as she read, "Dear Mrs. Graham, you reminded this town that community isn't built by money or policy. It's built by hands. Thank you for proving that integrity still has a home in Asheville." With gratitude, Mayor Lillian Graves inside was a smaller note, handwritten. P.S. I still want a spot at your knitting table. Esther chuckled. She'll regret that when she sees the schedule. Later that week, Jenna stopped by the hall carrying a small wooden box tied with twine. "Before I forget," Jenna said, handing it to Esther, "this is for you." Esther untied the string, lifting the lid. Inside was a hand-bound ledger, its cover embossed with gold lettering, the yarn files. Each page was thick with names, dates, and photos, documentation of every vote, every headline, every act of defiance. Nina ran her fingers across the first page. "You made an archive." Jenna nodded. "Not just for now, for when we're gone. So nobody ever says we imagined it." Rosa leaned over, reading aloud the dedication etched inside the cover. "For those who believed quiet hands could still make history." Esther closed the book gently. "We didn't just keep the hall," she said. "We kept proof that it mattered." The three women stood in silence, the hum of late afternoon crickets filtering in through the open windows. Outside, the burgundy door gleamed in the sun, a heartbeat at the center of Maple Ridge. Esther turned to her friends. "You realize," she said, "we built something stronger than they ever could." Rosa grinned. "And we didn't have to pour a single ounce of concrete." Nina laughed softly. "We built a home out of stories." Esther nodded. "Exactly. The kind they can't tear down." The golden light of early autumn stretched long across Maple Ridge Avenue, catching in the windows of the freshly painted community hall. 50 years. Half a century of laughter, labor, and the quiet defiance of ordinary people who refuse to let their home be erased. Inside, the air shimmered with the hum of conversation, the scent of apple cider and cinnamon rolls drifting through the open doors. A banner stretched across the back wall, "Maple Ridge Community Hall, 50 years strong." Esther Graham stood near the stage, her silver hair pinned neatly, her cardigan buttoned all the way up. She looked out over the rows of chairs filling the hall, the crowd larger than she'd dared to imagine. Former students, neighbors, the mayor, even the local news team. In the front row sat Rosa, grinning with her usual mischief, and Nina beside her, clutching a tissue already damp from tears. Rosa leaned over and whispered, "Well, Queen Esther, this is what victory looks like." Esther smiled softly. "No, this is what memory looks like when it refuses to die." Jenna adjusted the microphone stand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "please welcome our speaker and our North Star, Mrs. Esther Graham." Applause rolled through the hall like a soft wave. Esther stepped forward, her hand steady on the podium. For a moment she just listened to the murmur of voices, the creak of the old wood floors, the faint clicking of knitting needles from someone in the back row who couldn't help herself. Then she began. "When this hall was first built," Esther said, her voice carrying clear and low, "it wasn't just a structure. It was a promise. A promise that community isn't something you inherit. It's something you protect." She paused, scanning the faces before her. 50 years ago, I was young, full of equations and optimism. I believed in order, in the logic of things. Then I learned something far greater. Progress doesn't come from loud voices or big money. It comes from quiet hands that refuse to stop working. Rosa dabbed at her eyes with the corner of a napkin. Nina smiled, her hands clasped tight. Esther continued, her words weaving a spell. When they tried to take this hall from us, they underestimated the power of patience. They mistook gentleness for weakness, tradition for irrelevance. But what they forgot, what they always forget, is that legacy isn't loud. It's steady. It's stitched together, one act of courage at a time. A hush filled the room, deep and reverent. She reached down and lifted a framed photograph, the black and white image of the original co-op founders from 1973. "These are the hands that began the pattern," she said. "And every generation since has added their own row. That's what legacy is, a pattern that never ends." Applause rose again, louder this time. Esther smiled faintly, nodding toward the side wall. Behind her, a long velvet curtain was drawn back, revealing a line of new bronze plaques gleaming under the lights. Each one bore a name: Rosa Fields, Nina Tran, Jenna Lawson, Lillian Graves, and dozens more. Each of them had fought, taught, or stood firm when it mattered most. The audience gasped softly, then broke into cheers. Rosa, still in disbelief, whispered, "You sneaky woman." Esther just winked. "Told you I liked symmetry." Rosa stood and hugged her before turning to the microphone. "I don't have much to add except this," she said, her voice half laughing, half breaking. "If you ever doubt what one small group of determined women can do, take a good look around this room." The crowd clapped again, a long, rolling applause that filled every inch of the hall. Then Rosa handed the microphone to Nina. Nina took it hesitantly, her eyes glistening. "I started coming here for the yarn," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I stayed for the strength, for the way these women turned paperwork into poetry, for the way they turned a building into a heartbeat." Her throat caught. "And because of them, my daughter will grow up believing that quiet isn't weakness, it's power waiting its turn." Esther felt something deep and warm bloom in her chest. She reached out, resting a hand on Nina's shoulder. "You'll carry it forward," she said. "That's what matters." The room filled with applause once more, though this time it wasn't polite or formal. It was joyous, defiant, alive. Afterward, as the crowd mingled and laughter echoed off the high beams, Esther slipped away for a moment. She walked down the hallway toward the lobby, where the afternoon light streamed in golden through the tall windows. There, behind protective glass, hung the final deed, signed by every member of the knitting circle, their names gleaming in ink like threads woven into permanence. Esther stood before it, the reflection of the celebration flickering behind her in the glass. She lifted a hand, tracing her name with her fingertip, then Rosa's, then Nina's. In the distance, she could hear Rosa laughing again, the sound carrying through the hall like music. Esther smiled, her voice barely a whisper. "They mocked our knitting, so I wove their names into the deed and tied it off myself." The clock in the hall chimed the hour, 50 years to the day, and through the window, the burgundy door gleamed, strong and unyielding, as the sound of celebration rose into the fading light, proof that some things, once woven, never come undone.